No finger guns today, folks. Welcome to the In the Tank podcast. I don't know if you're hiding under a rock, but July 13th, 2024 is a day that's going to go down in history. An attempted assassination of Donald Trump sent shockwaves around the world. We're going to be talking about pretty much everything in relation to this. The failure of the Secret Service, the kind of rhetoric of the media before and after the events, and what's going to be happening moving forward in this country. We're going to be talking about all this and more on episode 457 of the In the Tank podcast.
Guys, do not listen to the In the Tank podcast. It is a dangerous show of dangerous men with some dangerous malarkey, and I do not stand for it. All right, where's my Vice President, Condoleezza Rice?
That is right, Joe. It is the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal, and I've got a full crew today. But before I introduce them, I do want to say, I should probably say this at the beginning of every one of our episodes, but it goes double it this time around, that anything said on this podcast do not necessarily reflect the views of the Heartland Institute as a whole. They are simply the opinions of the people saying them on this podcast. And I'm saying that because I have some things to say during this podcast. But I am Donald Kendal, your host, as always. Joining me, I've got Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing very well, all things considered, Donnie Kendal. I thought that disclaimer was going to be exclusively for me. I didn't know that you... so maybe we have to have a Donnie rant drop or something after this episode. We'll see. But I think a lot of us are still just kind of coming to terms with what happened on Saturday. I think it was you, it might have been, or a friend of mine texted me on Saturday saying Trump was shot, and I was like, what? That's impossible, I thought to myself for a moment. And of course, as we'll discuss on this podcast, it was very far away from impossible. In fact, it was probable, considering what's been going on in this country over the last almost a decade now. So I'm eager to talk about this, but also not eager to talk about this. The fact that we have to talk about this is pretty damn depressing.
Yes. Obviously, it's something that we're going to be talking about. Usually for In the Tank podcast, I have a whole bunch of notes that I'm going off of that's kind of carrying the conversation in a specific direction. This time around, I do not have any notes. I feel like this is going to just be a free and open discussion because there's so much going on. This is another disclaimer that I'll put out there, is that because of the news kind of moving so quickly on all of this sort of stuff, we're going to do our best to make sure that we're not just like pushing, false information or anything like that. But again, because there's so much kind of haze around this entire story, surely certain things that we'll be saying today might be, found to be not the case or whatever tomorrow. So a little bit of a grain of salt with some of the stuff that we're talking about. But also joining us, we have Chris Talgo, editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing good. And this is very much off topic, but I watched Hillbilly Elegy last evening on Netflix, and I highly recommend it.
Oh,
so if you want to learn about the background of JD Vance, Trump's new VP pick, highly recommend the movie. It's very well done, directed by Ron Howard.
Really?
Wow. Yeah. Brian Grazer was the executive producer. So this had some Hollywood heft behind it, and I think they did a great job. They told a great story, and it was just really interesting to see his mother, Bev, she was at the convention last night cheering on her son, and she just celebrated 10 years sober, which was one of the big battles that she faced throughout her life. So good for her, and I'm sure she's so proud of her son.
directed by Opie, famous for also directing the Star Wars Han Solo movie. Also, Sam Karnick is going to be joining us, editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. How are you doing? Oh, it's not. Nope, publications director. See, I don't have any notes. Sam, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well, Donald. Thanks for having me on the show. I just want to make sure that you know that if I say anything overly controversial today, it'll just be because I suddenly came down with COVID right in the middle of the show.
Good point. Good point. And if anyone's offended by anything Sam has to say and you want to send any criticism emails, make sure they're sent to Jim Lakely, J. Lakely. That's who you want to direct all of your hate mail to. Gentlemen, I think we have a lot to talk about. Seems like the past few weeks there's been a ton to talk about, but this is a particularly historic day. But before we do mention any of those topics, I do have to put out that message that I put at the beginning of all of these episodes, that if you want to help out the show, if you're listening to the show, audio version, you're probably catching it on a Friday or later, leave a review for us on iTunes. That would be greatly appreciated. Very much helps out the show and all of that. If you would like, you could join us a day earlier where we are live streaming on Facebook and YouTube and Rumble and X, and you can join the conversation, throw your comments and questions in the chat. Maybe we'll show your comments on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. You can also help out the show by not giving us super chats because we are demonetized on YouTube. Apparently, you can give us donations through Rumble, so wink, wink, say no more. But yeah, you could hit that like button, share this content, subscribe if you haven't already. Even leaving a comment under the video all helps break through those big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from being shown to more people. And if you want to support the show monetarily, you can do that. Heartland.org/inthetank. You go to that website, you can donate directly to the show, which is great because that means YouTube doesn't get a 30% cut of that super chat. So that's a great way to support the show. But, gentlemen, like I said, a lot to talk about. Historic day. This is one of those days people have already been talking about it, where it's like you're not going to forget where you were when you kind of heard the news. Maybe you'll forget some details, like Jim's account, because I did not text you about it. You texted us about it in a group chat. And I was in the living room with my two little boys. My wife was making dinner. And I said some probably swear word in shock. And she said, What's going on? And I said, well, hang on a minute. I got to look this up because it was a picture, I think of like the same picture that's on the screen right now, Trump with blood on his ear and face. And I thought like maybe that's an AI generated image. Like I can't trust anything Jim sends me. So I had to Google it. And I found out that it was the case. I said, oh my goodness, Trump just got shot. And my wife says, oh man, is he dead? I'm like, no, just grazed his ear. And then from that point on throughout the night, I'm trying to like take care of my kids while also staying up to date on this ever-changing story. And it wasn't until after the boys went to bed that I was able to really wrap my head around it at like 8:30, 9 o'clock at night. So it was quite a day on that Saturday. But Chris, you were at like a little social gathering when you heard the news. What was your story for this?
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. So one of my friends was in town. I haven't seen him in many, many years. He was visiting his wife's mother's house in Shorewood, which is down near Romeoville. So it's about an hour and 30 minutes south of, Arlington Heights area. And we were just having a great time barbecuing, just, chatting and, catching up on old times and everything. And one of the people there said, hey, it looks like Donald Trump just got shot, or like someone like tried to shoot him at the rally. But we were, not really paying much attention to it. We were playing cornhole. I was doing not very well, so whatever. Okay, but what ended up happening was, so this was like a pretty like closely packed little like neighborhood area. I kid you not, people were in their pickup trucks flying giant American flags. This was probably like an hour or two after, just cheering USA, 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 and saying, stuff that I probably shouldn't be saying on the air about what had happened. So finally, got home pretty late, and I got home just in time for that press conference. So I watched the press conference, which, really, like just made it all sink in. And it's just like, wow. I mean, like I went to bed that night, just having trouble believing that this had happened in 2024 in the United States. So it was just a total shocker for me. It could have ruined what was, a really fun, event that I was really looking forward to. But it didn't. And obviously, the next couple of days, I spent lots of time watching and learning about what had happened. I know we'll get into all that, throughout this podcast. But for me, it was just total shock.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let the record show that you can't blame your bad bags performance on being traumatized by the events. You said that happened first,
It
so
put
let
it
the
in
record show.
perspective, Donnie. It did. It really put it in perspective.
Sam Karnick, what's your story?
Interestingly enough, I was on my way home from actually a church service, and somebody texted me and said, "I think I just saw an assassination attempt on Donald Trump." And of course, and when the text came, let's say I pulled my car over to the side of the road and looked at the text and was like, wow, okay. So I turned on the radio and I'm listening, and they're saying on the radio, it looks like this wasn't really fireworks, that it could have been an actual attempt on the president's life. Oh, he's getting up. They're hustling him away. And they're just describing the event, and it actually was a very right, focused, decent report. There was no weirdness going on or anything like that. You didn't catch any bias in it. And so then, of course, I got home and I was watching the coverage all night, and I have to say that I was actually very shaken. This really got to me. It's like this is an exceedingly weird and disturbed world we're living in right now. And that's simply, it just really kind of knocked the pins out from under me. And that's very unusual for me. I'm not usually that easily caught up in these things.
Right.
But this one was one where it was actually even, it was reminiscent of the 911, where you're watching in real time what we actually saw in real time it happening. But also, you're watching the analysis of it and the people trying to get their minds around the event, and there is a certain amount of sincerity that was conveyed, which I thought was unusual for our time and a good thing. But this, I would say that we are in a very weird world, and I don't think it's going to get much better.
Yeah, Jim. I mean, I'm like I said when I told my story, and I had to Google it just to make sure that this wasn't some AI generated image or something like that. I am not one to jump to conclusions very quickly. So even after I Googled it and was finding some of the details of it, I still wasn't sure right off the bat whether or not this was fireworks, as Sam mentioned, or maybe the blood from his ear was just from when they brought him down, and maybe one of the Secret Service person's knee hit his ear or something like that. And when I was Googling, there really wasn't a lot of clarity offered by the media right at the beginning, which whatever, it's an unfolding event, so I can't really blame them too much. But as you know, I mean, there were some headlines that were like, Trump rushed off stage after apparently falling down. It's like,
oh God.
Some of that, and then they left those headlines up for quite a bit. It just kind of seemed like if it were the other way around, I feel like they wouldn't have been so intentionally kind of making it seem like this is a non-event. If it was maybe someone with a D in front of their name. But hey, maybe I'm biased. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, I don't have cable television, so I was not watching any of the coverage of this on cable news of any kind, CNN, MSNBC, or Fox. Chris watches all that for us, especially CNN and MSNBC, so we don't have to. It's a combat pay kind of deal for him on that one.
Right.
But as soon as I was informed that, actually now I think I remember, it might have been my mother who told me that Trump had been shot. My family is in Pittsburgh. My late brother had gone to a Trump rally during the 2016 campaign. I believe it was in West Virginia. If he was still alive, God rest his soul, he would have been there in Butler, Pennsylvania for sure. And so this kind of hits a little close to home because this historic, almost near assassination of Donald Trump happened, in my hometown, and it should also be noted and remembered that a very brave man died behind Trump, protecting his family from the bullets that were flying. And I know we're going to get into how and why that happened. But while following it on X, and then I did turn on actually CBS News to watch their coverage for about 5 minutes. And I just couldn't take it anymore. Turned it off and went back to X to monitor what was happening. And what was, as you alluded to, what was really kind of striking was the in the age of instant communication, where you can share your thoughts, whatever thought that enters your mind immediately. It was, I think, a sign of the times and how kind of broken our society is, that conspiracy theories on both the left and the right suddenly popped up. And especially on the left, they were immediately, a lot of people, prominent people on the left, in important positions in politics and culture, were immediately thinking that this whole thing was staged to benefit Donald Trump. And that's I think an indication of how sick, really, really, truly sick parts of our culture really are today. But and Andy had it up there on the screen. We'll probably show this moment of the assassination attempt. Often it's going to be, that's going to be footage that's going to be seared into the memory of America forever. But it wasn't the Secret Service that spared Donald Trump's life. It was PowerPoint that spared Donald Trump's life, because he moved his head a millisecond before the bullet arrived to look at the PowerPoint presentation on the screen to his right. And if he did not look there at that exact very moment, his brains would have been all over that stage on live television. And for some people to think that this was staged, and for actors and entertainers like Kyle Gass of Tenacious D saying on stage that his birthday wish was that they don't miss Trump next time. Sam would probably recall this. I mean, I don't think he's quite old enough for this. But when in the late 1960s, 1968 was a very tumultuous and dangerous and tragic year in the United States. Both Martin Luther King was assassinated and Robert F. Kennedy was assassinated. And if you listen to people, if you talk to people who were around then, what people would say, they would just say, they shot Dr. King. They would say, they got Bobby, right? They didn't say Sirhan shot. They didn't care what his political motivations might have been, or none at all, or just being insane, or maybe being, some sort of conspiracy. The vernacular in America at the time was, they got Dr. King. They shot Bobby. They shot Trump. And we live in a world in which you can and should say it that way. They tried to kill Trump. They killed an innocent man and gravely injured 2 others. But they tried to kill Donald Trump. And they have been out to get Donald Trump for a very long time. My immediate reaction while the shock of it was still happening, was that I expected, come on, let's all be honest. We all would have expected an attempt on Donald Trump's life long before this, because the table has been set. And we're going to play some video from that infamous Dark Brandon Red speech in Philadelphia 2 years ago. And the President of the United States, our corporate media, have been relentless in characterizing Donald Trump as Hitler, as worse than Mussolini, as a threat to the very soul of this nation, about a man who must be stopped, that we can't have Hitler in the White House. That was Joy Reid's quote, and she still has a prominent show on MSNBC. And when this sort of messaging is being hammered hammered into the consciousness, the public consciousness of Americans constantly from almost every quarter. What do you think is going to happen? If it's, I don't want to both sides of this or anything like that, but you have to think about what our media and what kind of soul searching we should be doing in this country if everything was flipped, if the media was controlled entirely by right-wing radical nut jobs, like our media and culture is basically controlled by left-wing radical nut jobs, and that somebody tried to assassinate a Democrat president or a Democrat politician for president, what would the national conversation be? It would be obvious that we need to do something. We need to tamp down the rhetoric, and that's what we got from the media and from prominent politicians. Now's the time to tamp down the the volume and the temperature of our rhetoric in this country.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just close with this. I'm like you said, Donnie, this is a bit of a freeform podcast today instead of something really planned out. But as I watched the footage of the assassination attempt, and of course the iconic picture of Donald Trump, he tells the Secret Service agents, hold on, I gotta get let me get my shoes, and then he tells them to wait, and he puts his fist into the air, and he looks out into the crowd of his supporters, and he says, "Fight, fight, fight," and a commentator or a news person on CBS News said that was not the message that should be sent. He should have been trying to, in his statement, he should have been trying to tamp down the temperature in our country instead of going fight, 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 which I guess is some sort of provocation to the right to retaliate in violence. And we will all note, by the way, that it has been was 5 days now, and there is no rioting in the streets by any MAGA mobs. No cities are on fire. No retaliatory violence of any kind has taken place. In fact, it's the opposite. It has been a spark of patriotism and prayer and thanking God that this tragedy wasn't worse than it already was. But when Donald Trump put his fist up there and said, "Fight, fight, fight," he knew the moment. He knew that he had to reassure not just his supporters, but the country that he was all right, that he was not gravely injured. And it's that moment. It's like George W. Bush standing on the rubble with a megaphone. It's that kind of level of an iconic political moment, historical American moment. And it was then when he has his fist up and he's telling the world that he was not killed, that he is okay, that he is still strong. It means America is strong.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I will always, the part of the whole thing that happened as it was just starting to come to me, it's that was always going to have the most lasting impact on me was that moment where he stood up and would, and let the world know that he was not fallen, that he was not felled by an assassin. And that's really inspiring. And I think it's going to be inspiring for a lot of people for a very long time, if not their entire lives.
Yeah, I do spend a little bit of time kind of talking about the media and the rhetoric and the whole, the second coming of Hitler narrative and all of that. But maybe we should spend a little bit of time just kind of talking about just what your latest statements on this were, Jim, is just kind of like the optics of it. I mean, come on. Well, first off, the idea to like armchair quarterback what Trump's reactions were, his like instinctual reactions were, like literally seconds after he almost got shot in the head, is just unbelievable. I mean, that's just like pure adrenaline at that point, surely, that caused him to stand up and do the fist pumps and all of that. So criticizing that is just ridiculous. But man, oh man, like there is probably a dozen photographs that were taken that will be in textbooks for the rest of our lives. The him fist pumping, the one that's on the graphic for this, yeah, right there, that one. The one where he's it's like a very similar shot, but the different angle showing the American flag above him. There's a shot from, I think, a New York Times photojournalist from right in front of the podium where you can literally see the trail of the bullet going past his ear, or after hitting his ear, right? So like this is like I mean, maybe I don't have the right word for it, but like some of the imagery that came from this is just like pure Americana. Like it's pretty astonishing. Chris or Sam, do you have any comments on that in particular?
Go
I
ahead,
think
Sam.
what I think what Jim mentioned is very important. That what Trump showed there was leadership. He didn't immediately start saying, "Oh, it's their fault. Look, they're trying to kill me. They're bad guys." And he told his supporters to fight, and we all know what that meant. It didn't mean go riot in the streets. Nobody did. What he said immediately was that we have to do the right thing here. We have to try to be better people. And he pretty much immediately said that he was going to do that himself in his speech tonight. This is leadership. This is what leadership looks like. And so the big reason there wasn't rioting in the streets is because Trump called for people to fight, and they knew what he meant by that. Whereas I don't think that when you compare someone to Hitler repeatedly, and you say that they should be put in front of a bullseye and things like that, that the fight is just meant to be a metaphor. In 2020, it wasn't a metaphor. They were rioting through the streets, and it was nothing. The scale of January 6th was nowhere near what happened in 2020. So, look, you're responsible for what you say. And if it's a metaphor, you're responsible for the implications of your metaphor. No question about it. Well, the two sides have had different histories in this in the past 10 years. And the metaphors on one side have been far more martial than the metaphors on the other side. We have a president who had just been shot at, and he called for his people to fight a political fight.
Mm-hmm.
That is leadership. And I think that is the subtext of what makes all those photos so stirring.
No doubt. Chris, comments?
Can you remind me what?
We could save you for the next thing, but
Yeah, let's move on.
Jim, let's get into the media and kind of the rhetoric that preceded all of this. So you prepared a couple of clips for us to take a gander at, but generally speaking, well, I'll save my comments after. Why don't you kind of walk us through some of these clips and we'll play the ones.
Well, yeah, Andy has up on the screen a collection of headlines from the day of the assassination attempt. And Washington Post: Trump escorted away after loud noises at Pennsylvania rally. I actually remember seeing one of those headlines, and I actually tweeted, loud noises. It could be anything. It could be a dog barking. It's just loud noises. We can't really tell. So let's just not get too much detail because we wouldn't want to be wrong, right? Again, Secret Service rushes Trump offstage after popping noises heard at his Pennsylvania rally. Trump removed from stage by Secret Service after loud noises startles former president. And I think one of the headlines here is that I think it was CNN that had a headline on CNN.com that Trump fell. There it is right there. CNN. Secret Service rushes Trump off stage after he falls at rally. Of course, he didn't fall. He took cover from gunfire. And then was tackled by the Secret Service. I mean, this is at a moment like this, at a historical moment in which literally a tiny turn of the head as the trigger is being pulled is the only thing that kept his brains from being blown out the back of his head on live television. Our media that hates Donald Trump and frankly hates all of his supporters puts out headlines like this to be purposefully disrespectful and, of course, to continue lying to you. Our mainstream corporate media is not in the business of giving you news and telling you what's going on. They're in the business of lying to you. There's no other explanation for all of this. And then probably the most disgusting headline that I thought it's almost inconceivable, because the next day, Sunday morning, the Denver Post, their headline and I pulled it up here. Gunman dies in attack. Trump says he was shot in ear. The story in Butler, Pennsylvania was that a gunman died in the assassination attempt of Donald Trump. If there was any sense of honor at all in anybody in the media, they would resign en masse. They would quit their job at a newspaper that would put a headline up like that. I don't know why any reporter or even the freaking delivery guy should still be working for a publication that puts a headline like that on their Sunday paper. But of course, we have a shameless lying media. And even in this instance, even in the attempted assassination of a former president and the leading Republican candidate for president this time, they cannot help themselves but to cover themselves in disgrace.
Yeah, well, and I wonder how much of that. Is almost like covering themselves, considering that maybe there's a little bit of guilt in all of this, considering the rhetoric that was going on. Because like the narrative, like we've talked about, is that the second coming of Hitler. And if people really truly believe that, if you really ran with this, we talk about this when it comes to climate change, where it's like, if you really believe existential threat, we're all going to die, then nothing is off the table when it comes to trying to fight back against climate change or the things that are contributing to it or whatever. Same thing goes for this. If you truly believe that this guy is going to be like the next Hitler, then what wouldn't you do to try to stop them, right? And that seems to be, there's still the jury's out when it comes to the actual stated, intentions of this shooter or whatever, why he's doing it, the motive or whatever. But that was clearly the narrative in the media. So, Jim, you second attempt here. You have a couple of media clips kind of highlighting, this idea. Why don't you walk us through some of these?
Well, I just kind of have the one, and I think, I could have spent all week, every waking hour, just collecting clips of the mainstream media, setting the table, creating the environment so irresponsibly, in which what happened Saturday was inevitable. And as I said earlier, my only real surprise was that it hadn't happened long ago. And it's not just the media. It's it's funny. The media was criticized, and social media was criticized for giving Donald Trump a platform to speak. That's why he was kicked off Twitter before it was owned by Elon Musk. That's why his Facebook account was canceled, because it was irresponsible to give Donald Trump a platform to speak. That's why he had to make up his own in Truth Social. But here is a former United States Senator, Claire McCaskill from Missouri, invited on MSNBC. She's now a regular contributor to that despicable network. And this is just slightly indicative of the kind of language about Donald Trump that is used to describe him and the so-called threat to democracy that he is. Again, this is a former sitting U.S. senator. And Andy, if you want to play it, it says that she is, Trump is not like Hitler and Mussolini. He's actually worse.
People have tried to draw similarities between Mussolini and Hitler, and the use of the terminology like vermin, and the drive that those men had towards autocracy and dictatorship. The difference, though, I think makes Donald Trump even more dangerous, and that is he has no philosophy he believes in. He is not trying to expand the boundaries of the United States of America. He's not trying to overcome a neighboring country like Putin is in Ukraine. He is not going for some grandiose scheme of international dominance. All he wants is to look in the mirror and see a guy who's president. All he cares about is selfish self-promotion. That's the only philosophy he has, which makes him even more dangerous, because he has actually said out loud that it would be okay to terminate the Constitution to keep him in power. He said this. He actually said those words. And the irony is, all of these supposed conservative folks that have populated the Republican Party all stood around and with their thumb in their mouth going, well, yeah, okay, I guess so. It's bizarre.
Yeah. Chris, I'm going to go to you next.
Yeah.
I mean, you watch more media, especially MSNBC and CNN. But I mean, just in recent history, I mean, some of the narratives that they're running with, whether it's oh yeah, he says he's going to be dictator on day one, or he's promising a bloodbath if Biden gets elected. Like those are the things we've covered them, and they're all wildly taken out of context. But I mean, that just seems to be the narrative. Are we grasping at straws here, or is that really the case?
Well, I am going to take a different approach on this. I do not, quote, blame the media for this. I mean, I do not agree with the media's ramped up rhetoric at all. But I mean, this goes back to should we, ban music because music can make people do violent things? Should we ban video games because video games make people do violent things? I don't believe we should blame an object or something that has an influence. How about we look at the person himself, and how about we look at his parents? So before we all jump to these conclusions, first, I think this is going to take weeks to actually understand fully what happened. Everyone wants to just jump to conclusion. Oh, it was the Secret Service's fault. Oh, it was this for. It's going to take us a long time to understand this. So let's all just take a deep breath. But one thing that I have seen is that both of his parents were social workers, and both of them said that they, were detached from him. So that to me is a major problem. Apparently, he was, in high school, one of the people that was bullied a lot. I'm not saying that that's why he did this, but obviously, you know what? There are things that could have, changed his mind. His father gave him the gun. I mean, there's all sorts of things going on here. I do not think that he was just watching MSNBC for a couple of years and just was like, I think I'm going to go murder Donald Trump. This person, I think, is probably has major mental problems, and that opens up a whole nother thing of we don't actually deal with people who have mental problems anymore, and I mean, that's a whole nother subject to get into these days. But no, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say that the media were responsible for this. No, I think that that's a lazy approach, and it's it makes one think, well, okay, one random person cannot actually influence history. There's got to be this like grand scheme involved. Actually, you know what? One person, one degenerate, one nutcase can actually bring down a president or can change the course of history. We have to accept that. I think that some people just don't want to accept that fact. They want to be like, no, there's got to be like larger things at play here. So that's kind of my first instinct to this. And I think we should all, just wait for the investigation to be completed. I think there's a ton of questions going on here. But I do not think that the media are to blame for what has happened. I do not agree with how they have been portraying Donald Trump. But let's also go back in time and remember that even back in, the early days of this republic, you had a lot of mudslinging. You had a lot of, partisan papers. Obviously, it wasn't nearly as ubiquitous as it is today. But to think that like everything was, like down the middle, even in the early days of this country, is just not true. So we need to, I think keep this in context. But also, I'm a firm believer that the responsibility resides with the individual who did this. We don't know why he did this yet. I'm sure we'll probably find out eventually. But you know what? There might be no reason. There might be no good reason. And we just, I think, have to accept that, And I think that instead of like trying to put the blame on the media, why don't we just try to make sure this doesn't happen again? So why don't we make sure that we understand what were the pitfalls, what were the mistakes made by the Secret Service and some of the local cops there. I mean, I assume we're going to get into this a little bit because I've got a lot to say on that front.
Oh yeah.
But to sit here and just like blame the media, I think that that's just misguided. No.
Yeah, we are definitely going to talk about the socials. Everyone says Social Security when they're messing it up. It's just that little SS term. But yeah, Secret Service. We are going to get to that. Sam, I'm very curious about your opinions on kind of the media thing, and let me be clear about kind of my take on it, because when it comes to like actual like legal liability or something like that, obviously I don't think the media is in some way like punishable by law to cause for all of the stuff that happened, even with their rhetoric being so terrible as it was. However, I do think that general like media narrative that they were putting out there did contribute to an environment that stokes somebody that is definitely mentally deranged in one way or another to act upon their derangement. Sam, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, having been a writer and editor throughout my adult life, I believe in the power of words. And of course, the person who pulls the trigger is the one who's responsible. He climbed up the side of a building and scared off a policeman and immediately started shooting at a president. He's the one who pulled the trigger. He's the one who did it. No question about it. And he's paid the price for that. However, words are important. And yes, it's always been true that the political realm in the United States has been very spicy, full of awful language and horrible claims about other parties, other individuals running for office and the like. But what we have now is such an intense flow of words and thoughts and images and ideas. Social media have elevated that. The expansion of the media from just 3 or 4 TV stations to what we had starting in the 1980s, where you had 70, 80 stations you could choose from. There's an incredible amount of flow. You had news 24/7 starting in the 1980s. So we've been inundated in this kind of dialogue, this kind of talk in a way that was not possible before. When you were reading a newspaper that was events that came over the telegraph 2 days before, it was a little different from this. So the media and, importantly, the politicians, the lawmakers, those running for office who didn't make it, those running for office who did make it, they have an important responsibility here, and they've done it. They did this. They set this in motion. That doesn't mean that we say that we imply in any way that the person who did it was not responsible for his actions. He was, no question. But this is the world we're living in right now is irrational, it's disturbed, and it continually gets worse. I would like to go to the issue of motive. It's not as if, well, what is the motive? The motive was to kill a former president and a presidential candidate who was looking like he was about to open up a can of you-know-what on the sitting president who's running for re-election. That was the motive, was to stop Donald Trump from becoming president again and making things as awful as he did through especially 2017 to 2019, but even including 2020. Oh, all the horrible things. America was such a ghastly place at that time. It's so much better now. It's been so much better for the last 4 years. So you put all that together. He was trying to kill this person. Well, that didn't come from just his imagination. He didn't just have some crazy schizophrenic desire to our knowledge. Maybe he did, but he seemed to be functioning. Not a fabulous person, but the killer was functioning.
Yeah, but Sam, I mean, look at the guy who shot John Lennon. We have, maybe he just did it for like the same reason, just because. I mean, sometimes in life you just don't know, and sometimes we want to like force fit the narrative of, oh, it makes sense to blame the media that this guy did this. We have no clue. We have what if he never watched MSNBC or CNN a day in his life? Maybe like we don't know that, so to just automatically assume and make that connection, to me, is a reach at best. And then I think once again, it just absolves the person from the responsibility, because the end of the line is he decided to do that action. No one on MSNBC said, go and do this. No one said that. So I mean, I'm strongly side with the fact that it's much more of a reflection on the lack of character, the lack of virtue, the lack of family values. I mean, I think could go on and on about that stuff that is happening today in this country, especially with young people. This guy was 20 years old. Who knows? Maybe this was part of the whole, COVID, thing where he, was at home for 2 years and he went crazy. I don't know. But that's why I'm saying I'm not just going to go and flippantly say it's all the media's fault. They made him do this, because you have no evidence to support that. If we had evidence that this guy was like a longtime MSNBC watcher and like hung on every single word that Claire McCaskill said, Claire McCaskill has she has no power over him. I mean, that's just laughable. Claire McCaskill is a stupid political hack. She can say whatever the heck she wants. Are you because by saying that they can't say bad things about him, you're implicitly saying that, they don't have the ability to say that. I mean, I believe in free speech 100%. And I think everyone on this panel does. So, I mean, that's kind of a tough road to track there, where you're saying, well, I don't want them to say mean things because then that might spark people to do bad things. That's intellectually totally inconsistent. So,
Chris,
unless Joe Scarborough,
that he's 100% responsible for his actions. As I said, I fully agree with that. However, and I fully agree with freedom of speech. Of course I do. I've said that throughout my life, throughout my writing life and editing career and so forth. The point here, though, is that just as the killer is responsible for his actions, those who had said to put a target on a person, those who have said that this person is an existential threat to your future, Mr. 20-year-old and everybody else, that this person is a monster, they're responsible for that. They are responsible for doing that. You have the freedom.
See, I just don't
to
buy
go
this.
out. You have the freedom to go out and
kick
little babies if you want, but you shouldn't do it.
Result in someone doing something, because I mean, I've heard
Wait,
that
you don't
argument for so many years.
Wait.
Whether it's we got to ban rap music, we got to ban
Chris, hold on. Nobody's saying anything
anything
about banning anything, and I was a journalist for most of my life, and I would never dream of having the government force MSNBC off the air or take away the printing press from the despicable Denver Post. What I'm saying is that the reason language like that is used, it's propaganda. Propaganda works. That's why it is done. That's why it is attempted. And our media, and especially obviously in politics is all about propaganda. I'm not saying that they should be prevented from saying that Trump is Hitler and an existential threat to the United States of America, and that he would end the Constitution, and that this may be our last election, literally, because Trump will outlaw elections. I'm not saying that they should be prevented from saying that. I'm saying they should not say that stuff because it is extremely irresponsible, and because people take it seriously when it is pounded into your head from every direction. And it doesn't matter if this kid never doesn't even have cable, has never watched MSNBC. The idea that he does not know that this is what is being said about Donald Trump and about this election and all that stuff is, he would have to literally live in a cave, never read anything, never have gone to school.
Hey, listen,
have read anything.
We say a lot of bad stuff about the World Economic Forum, about President Obama, about President Biden. And if someone were to go and do something, like what happened on July 13th to one of those people, I wouldn't then say, oh, gee, I'm kind of responsible for that because I pushed him to do this. I vehemently deny that. And I think that is just so symbolic and emblematic of today's culture, where it's always trying to blame someone else instead of just saying, wait a second, this kid and his family are responsible for this. End of story. What was the relationship between him and his parents? Why did his dad, allow him to go and do this? If there was all these red flags, or and all his classmates were saying that they were joking that he was a school shooter and stuff like that. So to me, it's a much more of a local, the lack of a local response, and the most local is the family unit. Versus, let's blame some entity for spewing, propaganda and rhetoric. They're always going to spew propaganda and rhetoric. To me, that's par for the course. It's been par for the course for thousands of years. But when someone acts on that, I just think it's so lazy to be like, they did it because of that. Somehow
Chris,
Sure.
All the things you brought up are also factors in this. And just letting the media off to have no culpability in this whatsoever, I think is wrong. I mean, all of these factors were in play, but the idea that the media,
I think people are overplaying.
There is a degree that you
that's
can
just my
hardly
opinion.
measure on Earth difference between saying that Joe Biden's economy is the worst ever and his policies are ruining the economy in the United States, and saying that this person right here is an existential threat to our democracy itself. There is a huge gap between those two statements. And nobody is saying those sorts of things. They didn't say those sorts of things about Joe Biden ever in this race.
Oh, he doesn't really bear the responsibility. It's just that
I'm
they
not
planted
saying
these
he's not
ideas in his
responsible.
mind.
I'm saying the media has culpability in creating an environment
All right,
that makes these sorts of things more common. This was not the way the media treated even Ronald Reagan. But the media has called George W. Bush Hitler. They called Mitt Romney Hitler. They called John McCain
That's why
Hitler.
I'm saying
this
is
going on
par for the
forever.
course. Exactly that, but it to me it's much more a reflection on the immoral sense that has just overtaken the United States, where someone would even want to go do this. So I mean that in terms of assigning blame, and I don't really think assigning blame is the best way to approach this at this point. I would, because we'll never know for sure. We will never ever know for sure why he did what he did, unless he leaves some sort of manifesto or note. But we'll just never know. And it's almost like people just cannot, they cannot live with not knowing for certain, oh, he did this because the media
okay, all right. We got to wrap this up and move on to another thing.
and
I think
let me make one brief
I want to
point.
make a point too, and I'll let
Okay,
you have
go
the
ahead.
final word. Because we don't know, there is no manifesto yet. So for all we know, the guy wanted to shoot the little devil that was on Trump's shoulder, that he thought he was seeing or something like that. That's absolutely true. This black and white, who's to blame, the shooter or the media, I think is like a total straw man thing. There's nothing like that. Like I said, this isn't about liability in the eyes of the court, and we're going to bring CNN up on charges for what they said. No, nobody is advocating for that at all. But to deny that rhetoric or words don't have influence on populations, if we're going to go down that track, then why are we doing anything that we do ever? It's like people buy products because of advertisement. People do actions because of things that they see. There's definitely some element of the rhetoric.
Yeah,
like
but
I
Donnie,
said,
I mean, to me that's a flawed metaphor, because convincing someone to buy something and convincing someone to murder someone are two very different things. I mean, come on,
Actually, they're the same thing. And Donnie was taking this
I completely
exactly where I
disagree with
wanted to
that.
go with it. They are the same thing, because the way you do it is you say, well, this will make your skin wonderfully soft. And 90% of your audience may think, well, I don't want my skin wonderfully soft. I want it to be hard and rough. But the people that there are going to be people that are going to respond in the way you desire. And people don't talk this way. People don't put somebody in a bullseye or say that they are an existential threat, which means a deadly threat, deadly, that they will kill you. People don't say things like this because they don't work. They say things like this because they expect it to work. Now, what they expect to do is get people to buy their soap, which is Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. But some people buy a lot of the soap. And sometimes a message is more effective than what you may even have thought you desired. But it's irresponsible to do that. It's wrong to do that. The Edward Bernays, the man who invented PR, public relations, knew exactly how all this works, and they've been doing it. They've been using this language as PR. And the thing is, it appears to have had, nobody can say for sure, maybe he thought somehow that he was going to inherit Donald Trump's money. I don't know. But whatever happened here, this guy clearly cannot have been completely unaware of the notion that Donald Trump is an evil monster who is a deadly threat.
Yeah, but Sam,
to-
but you just
to normal
but wait a second. But we're focusing mostly on you guys are saying that the mainstream media is almost like solely to blame for this and responsible. What if because he was on Discord? So what if he was actually getting a lot of this rhetoric on Discord from other like people, and he was never, engaging with the mainstream media? So that's I mean,
but it's all the same because
no, it's not
the
though.
left
No,
is
it's
a
not.
herd. The left is not a plan.
See,
The left is
to
a
me, this is
herd,
not a
and
left or
the
right thing.
Discord is going to come out of what is said in the major media, and then they expand on it there. When you complain about the right wing people having conspiracy theories about this particular event, for example, well, it's coming from a discussion that is taking place in the mainstream media, that's taking place from the voices and lips of politicians themselves. So no, what happens is that this stuff gets out there and then it does its thing. And some people are affected more than others. There's a bell curve.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're gonna go long. All right, folks, because I promised a lot on the front end of this podcast, and we've gotten through one of the things that I wanted to talk about. Let's move on to the actual security breakdown, because surely there's a lot of crazy people out there, whether or not they have a logical motive for their actions or not, and some of them want to do crazy things like take shots at presidential candidates and all of that. So because of that, we have systems in place to prevent those crazy people from doing those things. And when it comes to high-level politicians like Donald Trump and public figures like that, we have security forces. And what's supposed to be the most elite one of those is the Secret Service. So how in the hell did some 20-year-old with a rifle slung in his back crawl up onto one of the 6 buildings in the area unaccosted, and be able to take multiple shots at Donald Trump before, being eliminated? That is a massive question. I think there's going to be probably more investigation to that than anything else in the past couple of days and in the coming weeks and months. But the timeline of this is coming to light more and more as we get more details, and surely we'll get more details after this podcast. So again, grain of salt with all of these things. But the latest story that I've heard, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but the first kind of insight into this shooter at the location actually came like hours beforehand. And I think like maybe within an hour of Trump actually going up on stage, there were sightings of this shooter on the roof with a sight finder thing or something like that. People saw him do this, and then he disappeared. He went somewhere, got down off the roof or something like that. They couldn't find him. They said that he was like a person of interest that was upgraded to like a threat or something like that before Donald Trump even got on stage. But he was allowed to go up on stage anyways. Then dude climbs back onto the roof. People are pointing him out. They're trying to alert police. Sam already mentioned a policeman went up there. The shooter pointed the gun at him. The policeman went back down. I've seen one video that was kind of compositing all of these videos together and showing that like 2 full minutes had passed between the time that people were pointing this guy out and yelling for police and then the time that the shots were actually fired. How was any of this? How did any of this happen? All under the noses of again, I almost said Social Security. Secret Service is beyond me. I don't necessarily want to go down the conspiracy theory road, but man, oh man, does that path look enticing to me at this moment. Chris, do you want to take first jab at this one?
Sure. Okay. So when this, the morning after, my brother and I were talking about this, and he just immediately kind of went into oh, I can't believe this happened, the Secret Service. And I was like, hey, wait a second. You got to understand the fog of war. You've also got to understand that you had a few Secret Service agents there who were working with local police, who were also working with the state police. Apparently, they weren't even all in the same channel. So you had a liaison between the local police and the Secret Service. So this is all, to me, so reminiscent of what we experienced in the months before 9/11, where things were siloed. The whole point of Homeland Security and the lesson learned from 9/11 was, hey, you got to have information sharing. Now, information sharing, in the months leading up to 9/11 across the world, literally across these vast agencies, I can see how a couple things could fall through the cracks. but we're talking about information sharing in a small space in a very confined amount of time. So the fact that there was an ample sharing of, hey, Secret Service, local police, coordinating like everything together shows me once again that government in and of itself, by its nature, by definition, is like inefficient, clunky, clumsy, and just drops the ball. Okay. So I don't think this was on purpose. I don't think this was deliberate. I don't think it was intentional. There's still a lot of stories about were Secret Service agents diverted to a Jill Biden event in Pennsylvania as well. So, but you know what? Before we just like jump, because one thing that just annoys the crap out of me is literally 5 minutes after the Secret Service was in on it. Oh, it's like you have no evidence. Like, what are you talking about? Usually 9 times out of 10 in these kinds of situations, it's not intentional. It's not deliberate. It's just like, just incredibly terrible mistakes. I am not excusing it. I am not saying that is okay whatsoever at all. I think heads should roll. I think there should be major accountability. I think the Secret Service director should be fired. But I think you've also got to keep this in the context of the President Biden. President Biden does not hold people accountable. So whether it was after Afghanistan or whether it was, just like one thing after another, he doesn't just go in there and say, wait a second, major failures were made. We got to we need to get to the bottom of it. And then we need to make changes going forward. So the fact that attitude does not exist in the Biden administration makes me once again like, okay, this is kind of par for the course. The Secret Service is, we want to put them on a pedestal, but you know what? They have made errors again and again and again. And they're going to make errors again and again and again. And I know that this seems like this was a really, really blatant, mistake. And I think this should not have happened. But until we get all the information, because people are talking about he had a ladder, no, he didn't have a ladder. He jumped onto an air conditioning, unit. Another cop, saw him on the roof, but he was being boosted up by another cop, so he couldn't grab his gun. It's like there were so many like loose ends. Before we start assigning blame, before we start doing this stuff, let's just gather all the information and make sure we have all the information and make sure it's accurate information and then proceed forward. That used to be the way it was, but in our 24/7 media cycle and this just constant, everyone has to like be on the jump and have the first scoop. That's all just been thrown out the window, and it's just everyone wants to have an opinion, and everyone wants to just come in and think that I know everything, and here you go. You know what? We'll probably never know the full story of what happened here. We'll probably never know.
Yeah, I this will be like the third time that I mentioned this, but I could probably say it a dozen more times before the end of the show that we don't have all the information. We're going based off of what we currently have, which could change tomorrow, and all of that stuff.
But is it wise to try to assess something when it's still like a moving? When things are still so up in the air. I think it's. I don't.
See,
because,
I do
because you're probably going to jump to false conclusions based on the fact that you don't have the full amount of evidence in front of you.
Sure. And I don't want anyone to rigidly adhere to some conclusion based on the very limited information that we currently have. However, in open discourse like this, I think is where questions arise that get people thinking and asking the right questions to make sure that those that should be held accountable are held accountable. And I think that this general conversation contributes to that.
I agree completely with that.
But Jim, I mean, let's talk about some of the things that are being discussed now, because it's not like they're going down was it like Daily Plaza or something like that, where there's warehouses and millions of windows and all of that. There was like literally like 6 buildings in the entire area. And this one was, I've heard some people, I'm not exactly sure of their credentials or whatever, talking about how this is essentially like a textbook example of like a sniper hotel. Whereas if there were somebody with a malintent, like that's where they would be. So how do we guard against that? We have some police inside that building. What? I mean, this just kind of seems crazy. I know mistakes happen. Even Secret Service, even the most elite, whatever protection agencies or whatever are just composed of people who are fallible. But God bless it. This is quite a failure. What are your thoughts?
I'm reminded of that saying that I usually disagree with, but not in this case, that you should not ascribe to malice what incompetence can explain, something like that. I think this was one of those instances of absolute rank incompetence, but also piled in there. It's obviously a very complicated situation. Is the fact that it's been widely reported that the Secret Service was determined, and for a long time, to do the absolute bare minimum required to protect probably the number one political target in the United States outside of a president himself. It's been reported that his usual Secret Service team was not in place on Saturday, that they have been overworked because they do not have enough guys basically to cover everything. And so they needed a little bit of a break. And so this was kind of a hodgepodge of, a patchwork of a security team with some Secret Service, some guys from Homeland Security. You got local cops. And, just getting back to that building, I mean, again, I saw it reported that the Secret Service had identified the most obvious sniper nest point in the entire area. And, and so they actually, that was the staging area for all the police, was inside that building. And that the intent, and I've been to presidential events when I was a reporter. I went to them all the time, campaign events all the time. You see snipers everywhere. And the reason you put a sniper in a sniper nest so that a real sniper, or a counter sniper guy, I guess, in a sniper's nest, is so that a real sniper, somebody trying to kill somebody, doesn't take that position instead. It's one of the reasons you do that. But it was the Secret Service, the head of the Secret Service. I'm forgetting her name now for some reason.
Kim Cheadle.
Kim Cheadle, that's right. Yeah. She had said that the intent was to have personnel, police, Secret Service on that very roof, but they were not on that roof for two reasons. It was kind of hot outside, and that the roof was too sloped. And so it was dangerous to have the Secret Service on that severely sloped roof. That excuse is so absurd that it is insulting, and it's almost like a thumb in the eye of the American people. To come up with an excuse that absurd is almost purposefully insulting, right? I mean, because of course the counter snipers that took the guy out were on a roof that was much more sloped than that, as it points out. And of course there's snipers on the roof of the White House that are in more dangerous positions. And then of course there's the fact that it is the job of a Secret Service agent to put his body between a bullet and the president and his target. And that's cool, but being on a roof that you might slip off of because it's really steep would be just too dangerous. So that, I mean, it almost defies belief how incompetent this was. So, I don't think there was any real malicious intent, other than the fact that it's Donald Trump had asked for more security, has asked for more Secret Service. He didn't get it. He asked repeatedly for it. He didn't get it. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., considering his family history, asked for Secret Service protection as a presidential candidate. Biden administration refused to give it to him. Now, of course, he has it. And now, of course, Donald Trump has beefed up Social Security, Secret Service protection now that he didn't have before. But the idea, there was a joke from one of our commenters here on YouTube. Why did so many of the Secret Service agents protecting Donald Trump look like a Melissa McCarthy character from the movie The Heat? The idea that it is a good idea to have 5'3" women as the body protection for a 6'3" man is, again, it's so incompetent and it's absurd. Thankfully, the president now, I noticed when he walked into the Republican National Convention on Monday, he had a lot of very tall, beefy men walking around with him. He didn't have any short females with ponytails protecting his body. He had, well, let's face it, real Secret Service agents, body men doing that job. So when you combine the fact that the Biden administration was refusing to do anything above the bare minimum to protect Donald Trump, and then he has an overworked staff, and then you just add in the complete incompetence that, yes, how a sniper can crawl onto the roof of the building that is a staging area for all of the police protection outside the perimeter, it almost defies belief. But he was able to do it. I would say stranger things have happened, but that's a pretty strange occurrence.
Yeah, no kidding. Sam, I want your take on this because, it seems like just crazy security breakdowns should never been allowed to happen. The following day on Sunday, my wife and I were driving around, and there was a kind of a news interlude that came in saying that Secret Service, right? Secret Service was going to have a press conference kind of talking about whatever. They're like, oh man, we're going to get some answers. Let's listen into that. And it turns out, as we were listening to it, that had nothing to do with Saturday's events. The entire press conference was dedicated to just like them trying to assure people that they've got it covered when it comes to the RNC. Don't worry, we're making sure we're checking all the boxes. And then any questions that came in about Saturday's events, you're going to have to redirect that to another department. We're not talking about that today. And to this day, I mean, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, I feel like there really hasn't been any answers offered by the Secret Service. And I have this video. The audio is just terrible, so maybe you could just kind of play it in the background while I kind of finish teeing this up for Sam, Andy. But they're at the RNC, that Kim Cheadle, the director of Secret Service, was there, and she was basically being I don't know if accosted is the right word, but aggressively pursued by two different Congress people, Marsha Blackburn, and I can't think of the other person off the top of my head. But for several minutes, they're trying to get some answers out of her, like give some explanation. Let's talk right now. Oh, I can't talk right now. It's not a good location. Well, let's go find a conference room. Let's talk. You need to give us some answers. You owe us some answers. They literally like chase her down the hallway. She runs away from them. But like, what are your takes, Sam? I mean, obviously this is a massive security breakdown. Are we going to get some answers? Are we going to get some accountability? It appears as though she's not going to resign. Even what's his name, Mayorkas, was saying that she shouldn't resign. What are your thoughts on all this?
What will drive what happens with Cheadle is what will work politically. That's what will drive it. Incompetence thrives and expands very, very rapidly in an environment of diminished personal responsibility. And in my life, I saw a moment where everything changed in this country. We've had a great descent from our moral principles since the end of World War II, really. And one could even trace it to part of World War II, the dropping of an atomic bomb on civilians, or on civilians in two different places. But then you'd have to go back to the firebombing of Germany and other outrages that our country committed even in that war. But the loss of a moral compass, the loss of direction increased very rapidly in the 1960s. And then we had a 1960s style president starting in 1993. And there was an attack by government agents on a silly, stupid, possibly dangerous, but not yet, cult in Texas. And that resulted in massive loss of lives. That was absolutely unnecessary. They could have picked up David Koresh at any time, and they didn't. They invaded. The Attorney General of the United States at that time, Janet Reno, said, I take full responsibility for this. And she retained her job. Nothing happened. Nothing happened. I believe that was a very, very much of a turning point in the United States. I don't think that it was a specific thing that in itself changed anything. No, I just think it was emblematic of what's been going on for a long time. So what you have here now is the government has taken on more and more. Its capabilities are less and less. And we've removed the sense of personal responsibility. It used to be if you said, I'm responsible for this bad report, this bad fiscal report. The numbers were wrong. I'm responsible for that. I'm resigning. That's how things used to be. Now I'm responsible for 50 people being killed. I can't even remember the exact number at the Branch Davidian compound, but I'm responsible for many, many people being killed. And so I'm sticking around. This is just more of it. And the government gets more incompetent the more it takes on. And as it does that, a person like President Biden is really kind of stuck because, okay, so I fire this person. Well, then the next person is going to be equally incompetent because until there is a habit and an expectation of being held responsible for your actions, people are not going to take this seriously. So what will happen in this case is whatever looks politically best to this administration and whoever the heck is running it, I don't know, but whatever looks politically best is what's going to happen. And my guess is that there will be no requirement for Cheadle to resign. If that happens, it will be because they sense that the American people have had enough. I don't sense that the American people have had enough just yet.
Yeah, I mean, Mayorkas, head of Homeland Security, said that he has 100% confidence in Cheadle as the head of the Secret Service, and that overall he has 100% confidence in the Secret Service. Donald Trump was shot. He didn't die, but he was shot. What exactly would it take for Mayorkas to have, I don't know, maybe only 90% confidence in the Secret Service and in Cheadle? I mean, it's so dumb. And it is, as you said, Sam, we don't live in an accountability culture anymore. I just wonder, what kind of a failure would it take does it take for a government bureaucrat to get fired? Apparently there is absolutely no way a government bureaucrat can or would ever be fired. And apparently the people that are, populating our bureaucracy, there's nothing at all that would ever compel them to feel that maybe it's appropriate for me to resign, that I am not good at this job, that I have committed a horrible public failure of a catastrophic degree, and that maybe I should go and, go do something else with my life. But no, our ruling class is the dumbest, most incompetent ruling class since the fall of Rome. And we have to continue suffer through it. And sometimes people get killed because of it.
Yeah, absolutely crazy stuff. As updates and all of that kind of come in over the following weeks, we'll probably cover, some of the bigger aspects of this. But as is tradition with our show, there's always going to be breaking news tonight, this afternoon, after we're done broadcasting the show. That is no different this time around. Donald Trump is going to be giving a speech at the RNC. After the events of Saturday, he, obviously he had like a speech or remarks prepared. It's been reported that he's basically throwing that in the trash and starting over with a whole different kind of outlook on everything. So let's wrap up the show by just kind of speculating as to kind of what Donald Trump we're going to see tonight at the RNC. I'm not entirely sure what to expect. I was kind of expecting Donald Trump to make more of a kind of a public appearance, before this, but this is the first time, other than maybe a couple of Truth Social messages that he's put out there, where he's actually going to be addressing, the population at large. So what is the expectations here? Chris, I want to go with you. What do you think? What do you expect to hear out of Donald Trump tonight at the RNC?
Well, it's not what I expect to hear. It's what he said he's going to do. He's going to try to unite the nation. I think that this humbled him. I think that it's, was probably a life-altering event for him in many ways. Just the look on his face when he came out a couple of days ago on Tuesday at the RNC for his first public appearance after, almost being killed. I thought he had a just different look on his face, just a different demeanor about him. So I think he's going to come in, and I think he's going to use this as a way to really unite people once and for all. America needs to be united. I think there's a lot more we have in common that we have apart. Even me and some of my liberal friends, I think we agree on a lot more than we disagree on. And I hope that Donald Trump really takes that and runs with it.
Sam Karnick, your thoughts. What do you expect to see at the RNC tonight?
I expect to see more of what we've seen throughout the convention. The speakers were very clear about tying their personal experiences to what the nation needs and to trends in the nation. So you could take, for example, what J.D. Vance said last night, where he tied his personal experiences to what makes a great nation. And Nikki Haley saying, yes, we've had our disagreements, but I fully 100% support Donald Trump. I expect Donald Trump will fully 100% support Donald Trump tonight. But I think that him tying his personal experiences to this is going to be an interesting thing, because the man was shot at. He was almost killed. It was the great Samuel Johnson who said that the prospect of being hanged in a fortnight concentrates the mind wonderfully. And there's also an old saying that nothing is more exciting than being shot at and missed. I think that old saying may be wrong. That it's very It was clearly very painful to Donald Trump to have undergone that kind of level of malevolence directed at his head, intended to kill him. He's going to come out tonight and try to show people that, as has been done throughout this convention, that this is a human being. This is a human being. People we disagree with are human beings. And that in itself, I think, will tend to put his party and himself in a good position as regards the impression that the American people take of them. It's up to the other party to do as they please, as they think is what's ever important to them, to say what they want. But my belief is that what President Trump will do tonight is go to that notion of our common humanity, and that it doesn't matter what somebody else thinks or wants to do with themselves. They're still a human being. They still deserve respect and decency. I believe that that's where he'll go with this. He will be condemned by some people for every word that isn't exactly what they want to hear, and he will be lauded by other people for reflecting what they believe. That is our common humanity too.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Jim, what do you think? I mean, I see some liberal commentators, especially online and Twitter, talking about this is Trump Reichstag moment, and he's probably going to come out there with the iron fist and say, if you're not voting for me, you're going into a camp. What do you think, Jim?
Oh, geez. That's I was in a good mood there for about 2 seconds, and then you ruined it for me. I think what Sam said actually was very profound and very insightful. I think Donald Trump, what happened to him obviously was traumatic, and him getting up and standing with his fist saying, fight, fight, fight. That was just adrenaline.
Of course.
Right. And I think all of us are just kind of still just starting to come to terms with what exactly happened here. And of course, Donald Trump was doing that too. And as Sam said, Donald Trump is an actual human being. He's not an idea. He's not a statue. He's not a computer game. He is an actual living, breathing human being. Thank God that he's still living and breathing. But you can't experience what he experienced and have it not change you. Maybe it permanently changes him. Maybe it doesn't. But it's hard not to believe that Donald Trump believes that he was spared by God. He certainly does not. And he said it in his first interview. I think it was with Byron York, where he said, I shouldn't be here. I should be dead. And he knows that. And that's obviously true. And tonight's speech by Donald Trump at the Republican National Convention is going to be the most watched speech by a Republican at his convention in history. And Donald Trump, as he said, after the shooting or after the assassination attempt, I don't want to keep using that, ever use that word, just shooting, assassination attempt. He said he had a pretty hard and pretty tough speech ready to go, going after Biden. And he threw that away and rewrote it. And so I think we're going to see a very different Donald Trump, who frankly, I think this sounds crazy, but I think he gets kind of a bad rap for being negative on the campaign trail. If you actually watch his rallies, sure, he attacks Biden and he takes cheap shots at people and he makes jokes and he insults people. But at its heart, the Make America Great Again agenda, the MAGA agenda, really, it's a positive agenda. Yes, he points out the things that are wrong in this country, but he brings forward solutions and a vision of a better America, of these things improving. And it actually worked. And that did happen after he was elected in 2016. And I think you're going to hear a much more positive and future looking Donald Trump than you probably ever have before. And a lot of people even people that didn't like Donald Trump, are going to be actually listening to him for the first time, actually listening to what he says. So this is going to be something else.
Yeah, no doubt. All right, we are 24 minutes long here. So I want to thank everyone for tuning into this episode of In the Tank podcast. Join us every week for a new episode. If you are one of those audio-only listeners, probably catching the show on a Friday or later, join us a day earlier on Thursdays at noon Central Time, where we are live streaming this on Facebook and YouTube and Rumble and X, and you can throw your comments and questions in the chat. Maybe we'll show your comments on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. You can support the show by doing a couple of things. One, that won't cost you a penny, just costs you a couple of seconds, hitting that like button, subscribing if you haven't already, sharing this content, or just leaving a comment under the video. All helps break through those big tech algorithms to prevent content like this from being shown to more people. You could also support the show, not through super chats, because YouTube demonetized us. You can apparently still send us little gratuity things through Rumble, but if you want to support the show financially, you can by going to heartland.org/inthetank. That way YouTube doesn't take 30% cut of whatever donation you're giving us. If you'd like, you could follow us on Twitter or X at InTheTankPod. And if you have any comments or suggestions for the show, feel free to email us at inthethankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim Likely, where can the fine people find you?
At J Lakely on X, at Heartland Inst on X, and always visit heartland.org.
Fantastic. Chris Talgo, what do you have to pitch today?
Well, in keeping with my theme of dismissing calls for violence, I want everyone to go listen to Eminem's new album. It's great, and there's a ton of violence, but please do not go and commit a violent act and then say he told you to do so, because we've been down that road before, and for 20 years, Eminem has been on the side that, hey, you know what? It's his ability to just say what he wants to say. He has the right, and I stand by that 1,000%.
Right, and if you buy that album, it's not because Chris said anything that encouraged you to do so. It was your own free will. Also, Sam Karnick, where can people go to see your work?
That's a good one, Donnie. Thank you very much. Please subscribe to my Life, Liberty, Property newsletter. It's a weekly newsletter, comes out on Mondays, and I believe you might get something out of it and enjoy it. The other thing is, please go to heartlanddailynews.com to get a good summary of the policies and news that are affecting you.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you all for tuning in. We will talk to you next week.
He's a lion, dog-faced pony soldier.